Idaho Matters podcast is brought to you by St. Luke's On-Demand Virtual Care, which allows patients to see a provider from their home using a computer or smartphone with on-demand care for common ailments, such as a cough, sore throat, or a sinus issue. More information at stlukesonline.org. From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. This is Idaho Matters. Idaho voters could see a ballot measure in November 2026 that focuses on abortion rights. The grassroots organization, Idahoans United for Women and Families, is working to collect signatures for the initiative called the Reproductive Freedom and Privacy Act. This initiative would roll back our state's current near-total abortion ban and bring back the healthcare standards that were in place for close to 50 years. However, to get that initiative on the ballot, the group will need to gather close to 71,000 signatures by April 30th of 2026. So joining us today to talk more is Melanie Falwell. She is the Executive Director for Idahoans United for Women and Families. Melanie, nice to have you on the program.
Thanks for having me.
So Melanie, can you tell us a little bit about your organization and how it came to be?
Sure. Well, we are a statewide, nonpartisan grassroots group with folks really from every corner of this state, and a core team of us who began meeting shortly in the wake of Idaho's trigger ban, which went into effect in August of 2022. There has been efforts over the last 3 legislative sessions to mitigate some of the impacts of the trigger ban, which have caused a lot of hardship on doctors, on the medical community at large, and specifically on women, patients, their families. Some pretty harrowing stories that we've heard. We know, in short, this ban isn't working. It is not sustainable in the long term. We had hoped that a fix would come from our legislature, which, of course, has the power to call themselves into session whenever they like and pass any sort of legislation they like. No fix has come. So in the absence of that, we do have the power of the Citizens Ballot Initiative to draft our own law. As you mentioned, get enough signatures to qualify it for the ballot, and then let the people of Idaho vote.
So Melanie, what is the law currently in Idaho in regards to abortion access? You mentioned this trigger law going into effect. Explain where the law is right now.
Sure. So here in Idaho, a lot of folks don't realize that for nearly 50 years, 5 decades in Idaho, we had decriminalized regulated access to abortion up to viability, and past that in cases of medical emergency according to the doctor's discretion. And that system worked pretty well for 5 decades to create a predictable environment where OBGYNs and family docs and emergency docs felt comfortable practicing medicine. That has changed after the Dobbs decision, and that backstop of Roe went away. We were left with a trigger ban that was sitting on the shelf that is a near total, quite extreme abortion ban, one of the most extreme in the country, that does not take into account any allowance for the health of the mother and a pretty unworkable life of the mother exception. It has resulted in a lot of court cases. I'm sure people have heard about that and are probably pretty confused at this point. But the law in Idaho stands that abortion is illegal.
So Melanie, I want to talk about the impact this has had on Idaho women over the last 3 years. And you mentioned that there have been some pretty harrowing examples and cases. Can you talk to us about some of these cases, 1 or 2, what women have experienced when they have not been able to have access to this type of care?
Sure. I want to first of all just establish that we've have the dialogue around abortion access in our country for a very long time has been pretty unhelpful. And I think people have an idea of what the quote type of person who needs an abortion or accesses abortion is, what that quote type of person is. And I think that the biggest thing that I've learned over the last several years is that is a really flawed idea of a certain type. Listen, people have medical emergencies. Every pregnancy is different. Every pregnancy is unique. And we know a lot of folks are finding themselves in situations that are heartbreaking, that are made even more so, more heartbreaking, more dangerous, more risky, more expensive, more prolonged by interference from the government. An example here in Idaho would be, a mom went in for a 20-week scan, very wanted pregnancy, and discovered that the fetus did not have a skull, would never develop a skull, but that fetus did have a heartbeat. And under Idaho law, there is no medical intervention to help her and that non-viable fetus. Fatal fetal anomalies are a real murky, difficult gray area here in Idaho right now. And you have women who must stay pregnant with a non-viable pregnancy, risking their future fertility, their health. They could go septic, and they cannot receive care unless they A, leave the state, often at their own expense and at great risk, or B, stay and wait to get sicker. And that is not tenable. That is not how you practice medicine.
So, Melanie, the other thing I want to talk about in this is outside of having this reproductive health care available, this is actually impacting pretty much all women in Idaho because we are losing OBGYNs. And can we talk a little bit about that? Because I'm not having any more babies. I still need health care. I still need to see an OBGYN because women's health care doesn't end with pregnancy. So is there kind of a misunderstanding of that? We focus on reproductive access, reproductive health care, but women need access to OBGYNs beyond when they are pregnant.
Absolutely. I mean, we are seeing in the impacts of the ban pretty rapidly, not just a huge loss, a quarter of our OBGYNs ceasing to practice in this state, but loss of family physicians, loss of pediatricians, loss of emergency docs. On top of that, when one of those kinds of doctors leaves our states, a lot of doctors are married to other medical professionals or other doctors. And so this is rapidly becoming an everybody problem. We talk about, this has often been regarded as a woman's issue, but this is an everybody issue. We are seeing widening healthcare deserts in many parts of this state. We are seeing increased wait times across all specialties. And it turns out that criminalizing doctors has very real consequences for your supply of doctors. I think about a doctor out in Blackfoot, Idaho, that I had occasion to meet. And, she is a woman, an OBGYN who had been providing care in that region for a long time and had thought that she had never performed an abortion. But under this current ban, the different interventions that she would supply for a fatal fetal diagnosis or a miscarriage or other kinds of care were now criminalized. And so, as you can imagine, she's having a hard time deciding if she wants to stay.
So, Melanie, tell us about the initiative and what it aims to accomplish, because my understanding is that there would still be limits around access to reproductive health care.
Sure. Essentially, this would restore us to the 50-year standard, the Roe standard, which would decriminalize abortion at the same level we had for 50 years. Past viability, it would be regulated just as it was before and limited to cases of medical emergency, which includes the life and health of the mother and in cases of fatal fetal diagnosis. Additionally, this act seeks to establish your right as an Idahoan to make private medical decisions related to your reproductive health with your doctor without undue government interference, and would also protect things like access to birth control, things like emergency contraception like Plan B, and fertility treatments like IVF.
There's been pushback about this initiative, in particular from the Attorney General's office, basically arguing, the law does not need to change, and that, frankly, doctors are misinterpreting this law. How do you respond to that criticism?
Well, we have responded by taking the Attorney General in the state of Idaho to court to make sure that the language that appears on the ballot is as clear and complete and concise as it can be for the voters of Idaho to decide for themselves. I always think that the proof of the effectiveness of a policy is in its application. Every law, every policy has unintended consequences. Boy, does this one have a lot. And it's okay to say, hey, we passed this thinking that Roe would never fall. It did. And this is simply unworkable. And we know it's not working because of what we're hearing from the suffering of individual women and their families, and what we're hearing from our doctors, from the actual medical practitioners on the front line. And in my experience, these are not stupid people. These are kind of famously well-educated people. And I don't think this is a matter of them being confused. It's a matter of them saying, you have criminalized our ability to use our best judgment to make good decisions with our patients. There is never going to be a situation where a third party, like a politician or an attorney general, is going to know better what needs to happen in an individual, sensitive, private, complicated pregnancy other than that pregnant woman and her doctor.
I want to talk about the signature gathering in the last couple of minutes we have. You have to gather 71,000 signatures by April 30th of next year. These signatures, to be clear, can't just come from the Treasure Valley. They cannot come from just the most populated areas of the state. In order to also gather that amount of signatures, Melanie, you need bipartisan support on this effort. You can't just get the so-called liberals, Democrats in the state to sign this. I don't think you get enough signatures. Do you believe you can get these signatures in time? And how about this bipartisan support that you need?
Absolutely. Well, we're not flying blind here. We have a good flight plan put together by research and polling. And what we have seen time and time again is that broad majorities of Idahoans do not support this ban. I truly believe that this is a nonpartisan issue, despite a lot of opportunistic people's best efforts to make it partisan. This is a kitchen table private family matter, and Idahoans seem to feel the same way. Idahoans are also not big fans of government overreach into their private lives. So we absolutely need to gather from every corner of this state, and we will. We are getting ready to launch a statewide tour starting tomorrow, actually. If you go to backtooidaho.com, you can see when and where we'll be. I think we've got 12 different stops in the next 2 weeks. And then back to the Treasure Valley for some additional signing opportunities. We're well on our way. We had a launch event last weekend, and I believe we gathered in just a couple hours 1,200 signatures. And we're going to continue that on the road as we seek to qualify half of Idaho's legislative districts, so 18 out of 35.
So if you get the needed signatures and this moves forward, that means we would see this initiative on the ballot in November of 2026, correct?
That is correct.
And do we know what the wording of the initiative would say, Melanie? As you said, you have made sure that the wording is as clear as possible so people completely understand what your organization is pushing for.
Absolutely. Yeah, people can take a look on our website, backtooidaho.com. You can click right there and see the full wording of the law. And our petition packets contain the language for the ballot, which is a short and a long title, and then something called a fiscal impact statement, which indicates the cost of the bill, which is zero or next to zero.
Well, Melanie, I want to thank you so much for taking time to talk with us. We've been speaking with Melanie Falwell. She is the executive director of Idahoans United for Women and Families. We've been discussing the group's effort to get the Reproductive Freedom and Privacy Act initiative on the ballot in November of 26. They have until April 30th of 2026 to gather the needed 71,000 signatures in order for that initiative to make its way on the ballot. And that'll do it for this episode of Idaho Matters. Thanks so much for listening. And just a reminder, you can find all of our episodes wherever you get your podcasts.
These days, there's so much news, it can be hard to keep up with what it all means for you, your family, and your community. The Consider This podcast from NPR features our award-winning journalism. 6 days a week, we bring you a deep dive on a news story and provide the context and analysis that helps you make sense of the news. We get behind the headlines. We get to the truth. Listen to the Consider This podcast from NPR.